Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Live Your Great Story podcast, a place where we tell the stories of really cool people doing really cool things. I'm your host, Stacy Strickland, and today I have a conversation for you with my buddy, Trapper Haskins. He is a woodworker, an author, a singer, songwriter, triathlete, just an all-around amazing guy. And so I cannot wait for you to hear this conversation. So sit back, relax, because I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. Dude, Trapper, I'm so excited that we finally got to connect. It's been a number of years now. Like, I don't even know how many, but
it's been a while. I think we met when we were playing baseball over in Smyrna. Maybe
I think it was at the Carton,
3 years ago. Was it Carton?
It was Carton, yeah.
It's been 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. It's been a hot minute, but anyways,
yeah, it has.
Welcome to the Live Your Great Story podcast. This is, like I've said before, it's a place just telling the stories of really cool people and the cool things that you guys do. It's a place where I'm hoping people get inspired to dream big dreams, go on crazy adventures, and then inspire and serve other people. So when I thought about those, I thought about you because you've done some pretty awesome stuff. So before we jump into all that, though, just will you tell us a little bit about yourself, like who you are? You married? You got kids? Just a little background.
I do. I'm both of those things. Yeah, I live in Thompson Station, just south of Franklin, and I've got two kids, 11 and 12, I think. A wife. We just celebrated 20 years together. I was born and raised in Memphis in a pretty boring house. I had a school teacher for a mother and an insurance agent for a dad. And grew up playing Little League baseball and picking on my nylon string guitar and met Mandy at Memphis State. And then we got married in 2000 and left town soon after, basically. So yeah, just a pretty standard suburban Southern upbringing, and doing what I can to bring some adventure into the life now.
That's awesome. So when you guys got married and you moved, is that when you went to Chicago, or like where did the Cub fandom come in?
My mother's from Chicago, so my dad's from Tennessee, my mother's from Chicago. They met at Memphis State, just like my wife and I did.
Okay.
Which is now the University of Memphis. But I was raised from a very early age going to Wrigley Field with my granddad. So I've never lived in Chicago, but I'm a lifelong die-hard Cubs fan through and through.
So when they won the series, that was a amazing day for you, huh?
Oh, it was so exciting. And my son at the time, I guess he would have been 7, and he was thrilled too, and my daughter was. And I told him, I think I was 39 or 40 when that happened. And I said, I've been waiting half a life to see this. So don't get your hopes up that this is going to happen every year, because the likelihood is that it won't. So, enjoy this, luxuriate in the fact that we've won the series.
Take it all in.
We don't know. Right.
I was feeling that way with the Padres this year, where I was like, we might make it to the series. And then stupid Dodgers.
You guys were our team. My son and I were, once the Cubs were out, my son and I were we were all on the Padres train. They're such an exciting team to watch. They're so exciting to watch.
Yeah, I love watching Padres baseball. So much fun. Awesome. Well, I mean, let's stick on the baseball route for right now.
Sure.
You were one of the founding members, if not the founding member, of Tennessee Vintage Baseball Association, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about that. What is that? I mean, yeah, I know, but
we play. They play all over the country, but here in Tennessee, we play specifically 1864 rules baseball, and so we call it Civil War era baseball. I was first exposed to it when I was in Michigan. I was doing a boat job up there. We can get to boats a little later, but I was working on a boat in Port Huron, Michigan, and I was at the library and saw a poster inviting people to come play vintage baseball. I'm kind of a sucker for anything historic, living history, that kind of thing. So I showed up at the first practice and no one was wearing gloves. and they had this kind of oversized ball, and I was just smitten with the whole thing, and wearing the old uniforms, playing by the rules and customs of 1864, which are slightly different from today's game. And when we moved to Tennessee, I looked for a team down here to join, and one did not exist. And met a local vintage baseball fan, Michael Thurman, and he and I sort of hatched this plan to launch it here in Tennessee, and it caught on. It caught on in a big way.
Yes, it did. It exploded. I remember when I started going, I think there were only 4 teams, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And now
That's
there's
right.
all over
12.
Knoxville, Smyrna, all over the place.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Yeah. When we first started it, somebody was asking us, well, how do you get people interested? And my response was, I just want to expose the game to people, because when they see it, they get excited about it. I don't feel like I have to, or we have to sell the game to anybody. If they come out and see it, it's a different thing. It's a different thing. We're not kicking dirt on the umpire. It's a gentleman's game, a gentlewoman's game. We, like I said, the rules are a little different. So the ball can be caught on one bounce and the batter's out. So that makes it a little easier for the players not wearing gloves. You can't overrun first base, those sort of things. But all of the imperial numbers, it's 9 innings, 9 players on the field, 90 feet between the bases, and it's an underhand pitch. So it really kind of levels the playing field for all ages. I think our youngest player we've had has been 18. And I want to say, I feel like we've had a player that was at least 68, 69 years old. So we've sort of run the age scope as far as our game goes. And it's great. I love seeing intergenerational play, and everybody competes fairly. It's not, it's not a young man's game. I think that one bounce rule kind of, it levels the playing field for all ages, and really kind of all skills. So it's
the way the ball is shaped, even, it's it's round, but it's definitely not smooth, so it changes sometimes with the bounce.
Right.
And like you said, I feel like if people just get out there and watch it, you're going to be hooked. I didn't miss, unless I was traveling, I did not miss a weekend of watching,
fantastic.
It was so much fun, canceling plans to just go watch baseball. Now, I do love baseball, so I had that for me, but I agree. It's a level playing field, and that's what's so amazing about it.
Yeah. And what I really love is that, we play at historic venues throughout Tennessee. There's not any bleachers set up. And so we encourage people to bring a lawn chair or a blanket and have a picnic. We see tons of families out there with a picnic. So it sort of harkens back to, I don't want to be nostalgic and say an earlier time, but it really kind of gives people a chance to kind of slow down. We're not selling $9 beers or anything like that. It's just, it's a field and a game, and that's it.
And it kind of, like you said, it brings, I think, that family unit back together, where it's this is an opportunity to just focus on having fun together, and the athletes and the players will come out and interact with the crowd, when they can. Sure. And it's so fluid, and there's not this stigma or wall between we're the athletes, you're the fans,
Yeah, definitely. There's no division. We encourage the fans to, if they see something that doesn't square with their understanding of modern baseball, to come up to the bench and ask the players, well, why did this particular quirky thing happen that wouldn't happen in today's game? And it happens all the time. And most of the players love talking about the game. So it's a chance for, it's permeable. It's a permeable line between the bench and the families that come out to see it. So it's a huge joy.
That's awesome. Were you guys able to play this past summer, just with all this stupid COVID stuff?
Yeah, we had a truncated season, so it didn't start until, I don't think we started playing until late June. And because in Tennessee, a lot of the venues had to stay under 50 people at venues, we weren't able to advertise the games for people to come out and see them. But instead of the regular 11 or 12 game season, we got to play, I think, a 6-game season. So we got to sort of fulfill that want to play vintage baseball. But, I'll be the first to admit it's not the same when there's not kids in their little league uniforms sitting on the sideline. It's not the same when, a family comes out and throws a blanket on the sideline and, has a picnic and watches a game. And they're all free, by the way. There's no tickets. You just come out and, like I said, unroll a blanket, have a picnic, and you get a free baseball game. So
that's awesome. Have you guys ever thought about doing a little league version? I'm just curious.
We haven't, but we've certainly introduced a lot of kids to it. I wish I knew how to turn that notification off. Sorry.
That's okay.
I don't know if you can hear that when that notification. Can't. Oh, okay. But yeah, so we have kids that come out and we'll introduce the game to them and show them the ball. And some of them end up purchasing one of the vintage balls from us and going home. But we like to tell people, like, we have our game, but we don't have, we're no authority. So if somebody else wants to kick up a younger kid's version of it, have at it. It's a joy. My son loves playing, but our particular league, because of the way our insurance is set up, you have to be 18 years old to play in our league. So my son, who's 9, he's counting, he's 11 now. Sorry. He's counting the years until he can play with me. And we've had that. We've had teams where fathers and sons are playing on the same team. And it's just, it's a special thing.
Yeah.
It's a special thing.
It's amazing, like, even with the vintage rules, how much baseball, I think, and this might be a big thing, but like, I think more than any other sport, how baseball ties families together. Like, there's that bond that's made between dad and son, or in my case, like dad and daughter, like,
sure.
Or whenever I have kids, mom and daughter, mom and son. But like, I don't think any other sport really, like, it's just different, I don't know.
It is. I totally agree. And I think that a lot of that has to do with one of the things that people criticize baseball for is being too slow of a game these days. But that's the thing that allows conversations, and it's not, I love other sports. I love all sports, but baseball, it's got a special place just because I remember going to Wrigley Field with my granddad. I was 7 years old and he was 70, and we could sit and talk and watch the game. It wasn't, it's exciting, but it's not constant edge of your seat. There's space in baseball. I think that's what I like. I like the space.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, for sure. And then you also, I don't know about wrote a whole chapter or if he did it, but in Nathan Rucker, Nathan from the America at the Seams guy?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So like, he wrote this book. I think it's called America at the Seams.
I think you're right.
I have it. But anyways, I was reading through it, and he goes through like every state and what baseball has meant in that state, right? And so I'm reading it and I'm like, I know trap. What the heck? Like, so that's pretty awesome. I know that guy.
That's fantastic. That league. I'm glad you have that book. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. I have so much of their stuff, but
so we mailed them a ball because weren't they doing, I think they did an American, didn't they do a map of America with some leather from each baseball? Yep. So we mailed him one of our vintage baseballs, and I did an interview with him. So I haven't met him, but he and I have spoken on the phone at length before. Yeah. Okay. Cool dude. Really cool book.
I'm trying to get him on the podcast. He hasn't responded yet to me. So if you're listening, Nathan, if you know him, connect me. But anyways, gosh, I could sit here and talk about baseball all night, but we should probably move on a little bit. So another really cool part, I'm going to save your most recent adventure for last.
Okay.
But going back to 2002, right? Like we didn't know each other yet, but I know you have a history in woodworking, boat building, restoration, all that stuff. So give me a brief like background on how you got into that, and then what 2002 looked like for you and that adventure you guys took.
Yeah. So like I was saying, Mandy and I met at Memphis State and we got married, and as I've already said, I kind of have a proclivity to get into old timey stuff, old timey baseball, whatever it is, I want to know the history of it. And I had grown up on these fiberglass sailboats in these lakes or in and around West Tennessee. And so I got interested in like in wooden boats, the old sailing ships and stuff, which I haven't had no interaction with growing up in Memphis. But I knew they were in Maine. And so 2 weeks after Mandy and I got married, we packed a truck and we moved to Maine. And I spent 2 years as an apprentice at a place called the Apprentice Shop. And, Mandy took jobs around town, and we had a little 1-bedroom apartment on Route 1 up in Rockland, Maine. And so we spent a couple of years up there from like 2000 to 2004 or 5 or whatever. But during the winter of 2001, I guess we'd been there a year, and it just snowed and snowed, and I'm a Memphis kid, and there's like 99 inches of snow is what we got that winter.
Good night.
And
I'm a San Diego girl. I can't even imagine that.
Yeah. So maybe it was just a little bit of homesickness or whatever. But I had found this boat in a book called American Small Sailing Craft, which was old American work boats. And there was one called the Mississippi River Yawl. And so it would have been like the lifeboat on the steamboats, and the hunters and the fishermen would use it. Basically a workboat on the Mississippi River back in the 1800s.
Okay. And
it was 18 feet long, had a small sail, 2 rowing stations. And I said to Mandy, I said, what if we built this boat and took it down the river? I had grown up in Memphis, and I had grown up going to this place called Mud Island, which is about a quarter-mile long chart of the Mississippi, like a living chart of the Mississippi River. They've basically built a quarter-mile model of the lower river, and water runs through it. And so when I was a kid, my sister and I, we would eat popsicles and throw the sticks in the little river and follow it down. And at the end, there was a public pool, and that public pool was shaped like the Gulf of Mexico.
Oh, cool.
And so I'd kind of grown up tramping around, and that was one of my favorite places to go as a kid. And so in Maine, I said, let's build a boat, and, we can sort of relive that whole thing, So we spent about a year on nights and weekends building this 18-foot boat out of basically scraps from the boatyard and some barn board that I had bought. And we kind of built it on the cheap because, we didn't have any money.
Yeah, you're newlyweds, so.
That's right. Yeah, we were newlyweds. And I built the boat, and this old timer came in the shop, and he said, you're going to do what with that boat? And I told him that we were going to be rowing down the river. And he said, you guys have been married how long? And I said, we're just about a year. And he said, well, you'll either be divorced or married for life before you hit New Orleans to be stuck in a 18-foot boat with your new bride.
That's amazing.
So we started that summer, and we went from Lake Itasca, which is in northern Minnesota, all the way down to New Orleans. And the plan was to go to the Gulf of Mexico. And by the time we got to Louisiana, we just got rained on day after day after day. And these huge ocean-going ships start coming in past. They can go as far up as Baton Rouge. And so I'm talking enormous, the freighters that go across the ocean, they're in the river with you. And so you just feel like this water bug, skimming around with these gargantuan ships, and the rain and just some other, I don't know why, but we stopped in New Orleans. It seemed like a pretty good place to finish. And New Orleans, it seems like it's on the coast when you look at it from a map, but it's actually a little over 100 miles upriver.
Okay.
From the Gulf. And so we kind of walked away from it, and I thought, well, we've done that. And I was in my mid-20s at the time. And then right after the Cubs won the World Series and I turned 40, I just had a really, really hard time with it, and had a kind of an anxious, depressive episode, and started looking at the things I had done in my life earlier. I had an office job surrounded by, nice people, but it wasn't my kind of work. I wasn't really fit for it. And I kind of had this midlife crisis, what next kind of feeling. And the boat we had taken down the river was sitting in the side yard of our house. And it had been, since we've been off the river, it hadn't been in the water in, this was 2018. It hadn't been in the water in over 15 years. And so I told Mandy, I was like, well, what if now we got some kids, let's take the kids down there and the four of us can go down there and finish it. And I pulled the boat in the garage to kind of repaint it and discovered that the bottom had all rotted out. And so my daughter helped me rebuild it. So I got to get out the old boat building tools and show her how to use the hand plane and stuff. And she helped me rebuild the bottom of the boat. And then in 2018, we went down to almost exactly the spot where we took out, put the boat in the river, and we finished the trip and went to the Gulf. So
that's awesome.
2002, 2018. So we we finally finished it and signed our names at the top of the South Pass Lighthouse down on the Gulf. And so now I'm working on a book about the whole experience, the building the boat and going down the river, but also the sort of crisis of identity, the identity crisis or whatever that I had at 40, and then rebuilding it and going and finishing the trip. So the book's kind of a memoir, a mental health memoir, but it's also a travelogue about our trip. So,
that's awesome. And so you finished that with your whole family. So you had the kids and Mandy, or what did it end up being you and Mandy?
Almost. Yeah.
Or just you?
Well, no, the intention was for the four of us. So the four of us actually did get in the boat in New Orleans. And this would have been Labor Day weekend, 2018. And about the third day, it was Tropical Storm Gordon, I think was the name, was starting to creep up closer, and the weather was getting worse and worse and worse. And people were actually starting to evacuate. And so we were halfway down, and we made the decision to pull the plug. And so we took the boat back out at Point of La Hatch, and we left the kids at home and came back a few weeks later, and Thanksgiving weekend. So this would be 2 years ago this Thanksgiving. We finished the trip, just Mandy and I. So I wanted the kids to be with us, but some people said that's kind of nice. You guys finished it the way you started, just the two of you in the boat.
Yeah.
And it sort of came full circle. It felt like to go out into the Gulf the same way I did as a kid, chasing my popsicle stick down that muddy river.
That's awesome. Like, I literally just got chills with that. I love when stories come full circle, and how you said, like, yeah, there's that midlife crisis of sorts, and you had this dream that you could fall back on, like to bring up again, So how long did it take you to go from Minnesota to Louisiana? Like, what did the day-to-day look like for you guys? So I guess that's two questions, right? Like, I was telling my high school students about this conversation, and I was like, if you had a conversation with this guy, like, what would you want to ask him? And they're freshmen in high school, and they just go, why? Why would you do that to yourself? Like, oh, the generation we're in. So anyways, yeah, like, how long did it take? And then what was kind of that day-to-day?
Yeah. So the statistics on the water flow are, if a raindrop falls in Lake Itasca, it will take 90 days to get to the Gulf of Mexico. So 3 months is what it would take. That's a drop of water floating 24 hours a day. We took almost exactly that to get to New Orleans. So obviously we weren't rowing 24 hours a day. We rowed about 8 hours a day. We would wake up, eat, trail mix for breakfast or a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And then we would just row all day long. Just row. Jeez. And just watch the shoreline go by and, talk about stuff. And we got pretty fit, but we kind of devised, there was a couple of tricks that we would start doing. So we didn't know how fast we were going. We didn't have a cell phone. We had charts of the river, and we had a VHF radio, but we did not have a cell phone. So we couldn't like look on a satellite image and see where we were, GPS, any of that. So at lunchtime, I would find out where we were on the map, and we would stop for like exactly an hour and just eat lunch and read and just float. We just float down the river. And at an hour's time, I would, look at our surroundings and find where we were on the map. And then I could see how far we'd gone. And so I'd be like, okay, we went 1.5 miles. So the river's going 1.5 miles an hour. So,
wow. Okay.
But we still had to row to make distance. So we averaged our average was 26 miles a day, but that factors in some 0 days when we stayed in Memphis and stayed in St. Louis. I feel like we were probably regularly hitting 34, 38 miles a day, something like that was normal. 30, 35, sometimes 40, 50 miles in a day. But that's an awful lot of rowing. And then we would, at the end of the day, this was in the summertime, so the sun's setting pretty late. At the end of the day, we would start scanning the riverbank for a nice sandy spot. And there's tons of sand. I mean, it's just like sandy beaches everywhere if the water's at the right level. And so if we'd find a nice flat one, we would pull the boat up and pitch a tent, and Mandy would start cooking. And then this other trick that we learned after we almost got flooded out of our tent one night was, as soon as we would get up on the bank, I would find a stick and go down to the water's edge, and I would stick it in the sand right where the water was. And then we would eat dinner, hang out and read, start a campfire or whatever. And then before we got in the tent to go to bed, I'd go check that stick. And sometimes the stick was still right on the level of the water. And sometimes the stick was 3 feet out in the river. And sometimes, you know what I mean? So the water was rising at that point, you know, and sometimes you'd go out there and it would be falling. So it's just this, it's not tidal. So it's not, you know, you can't gauge it by the clock or any kind of chart. I mean, I'm sure there's charts, but we didn't have those. So we were just dependent on, you know, it kind of breathes, it grows and shrinks, and it's not on a calendar. So,
That's
but
amazing.
that's what the day to day looked like. And mostly, you know, the river's not vacant. There's barges and stuff out there, and there's a ton of pleasure boats up in the northern part of the river. But it never felt dangerous until you get to Baton Rouge, where the oil refineries are, the ocean ships come in, and you're reminded real quickly just how small and vulnerable you are. I remember rowing past the dock in Baton Rouge. We just turned the corner, and I remember these guys just screaming at us from the dock, like, "What the F are you doing? Are you guys trying to get killed? Get that boat out of the river," just yelling at us.
Yeah.
And when we were on the river in Plaquemines Parish, the sheriff's boat, we had the kids on the boat, and the sheriff's boat pulled up, blue lights flashing, and they're like, "You can't have kids on this river. You got to get them off the river." So we, you know, it was this, you feel like like just eyes watching you once you pass Baton Rouge. So it's a different river past Baton Rouge for sure.
Wow. That's crazy.
It was, you know, it's funny because it's something that when Mandy and I were doing it, I remember one day saying something or feeling like, well, this is just kind of the beginning of a life of adventure. Like this is the kind of thing that I want to do. And I remember Mandy saying, "I wish this river could just go on forever." Like it was really idyllic. It was a beautiful time. And then to get to middle age, it was funny. I found myself looking back and thinking like, that's the one thing I did, you know, like I play baseball and I play music, but as far as like adventures and stuff, you know, I think I had expected more of myself in the adventure department, you know.
Yeah.
When at the time it felt like this is the beginning of it all.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. I feel like there's a lot of people that might have that same mindset of, I'm in my 20s, I'm going to do this big adventure. But then sometimes like life just happens, right? Like you have to pay bills, you have to do this and that. But choosing those adventurous things, you know, is I think is so vital, and just trying to keep that at the forefront. Like I went to Australia last summer, and coming back, that was one of the things I realized was most people over there keep adventure as like the prime thing, you know. And
Really?
Yeah, where they're just like, I mean, yeah, I work, but I don't live to work, you know, like I work so that I can live, but I'm going to go to the beach and surf every morning before I have to go work, or I'm going to go do this or that, you know? So it's interesting.
Like that's inherent to the culture, at least the people that you were hanging out with. That's awesome.
Yes. Like my friends, they were telling me, you know, growing up, they went to, I think it was a private school, but they went to school every day. So they weren't homeschooled, but every morning they went surfing every morning. Like
that's the life right there.
You know, or like
awesome.
We're sitting on the couch. Hey, dude, the surf is great. Let's go. You know, and I feel it's like that in Hawaii, I think. And so I don't know. It's a little bit different I think with the American culture and just the way that our society's built up,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like there's a way that we can bring it back, So I love hearing that. And, that was actually gonna be one of my questions where it's like, okay, maybe you didn't realize it at the time, but like you had this dream of building a
Mm-hmm.
boat and going down the Mississippi. Um, what, like, what do you do? Like, what do you do now? You've accomplished that, So it's like, what's the next thing that you dream about? Do you, while you're in the middle of it, are you dreaming about the next thing, or do you wait? So what was that like for you?
Yeah.
And maybe that plays into your most recent adventure. I don't know what
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. Thinking back on it, I remember thinking, and we never had a 5-year plan or anything like that. You just kind of
yeah.
dream up things and think this is the way it's going to go. But in my mind at the time, in my mid-20s, we built the boat. We were going down the river, and we were moving back to Maine. I had gotten a job at a boatyard, and so I hesitate to say the plan because it wasn't a plan, but just sort of the nascent thoughts about it was we were going to move back to Maine, and we were going to either rehab an old boat or build a bigger boat, and maybe live on that for a while and live on the coast or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
you sort of react to what's presented to you, and you end up not doing those things unless you really, really grab hold of them. And I've done some
Right.
exciting things that I'm so thankful for and so proud of. But like, yeah, I'll be the first to say, like, we didn't really set out a plan to do that. You just think it's going to happen. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like now, especially with like, Instagram makes the van life look awfully pretty,
Yeah, it
but,
does.
but unless you get the tools and make the van thing happen, you're still going to be scrolling 6-12 months from now. And there's not going to be a van parked in front of your house, but you're going to have put a whole lot of hearts on other people's vans, which is cool. Like, those things can be
Mm-hmm.
inspiring, but like at some point you got to take one step forward and then take the second step after that. And
Right.
and I'm telling myself that too, because
Right.
I've done that. Like, I've scrolled and been like, oh yeah, we're definitely gonna do that. And then 4 years later, you're like, never even started
Right.
on it.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of doing things afraid. Like, I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, I want to do that, but
Oh
I'm
yeah.
afraid to do it. Or
Oh
what if
yeah.
financially it doesn't work out, or fill in the blank. But
Right.
you just have to do it afraid, right? Like,
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you're probably
Definitely.
going to
Yeah.
fail at least once.
Yeah.
But are you going to,
Yeah.
like, I call it failing forward, like I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
fall, but I'm going to
Yeah.
fall forward, and I'm at least going to gain some ground, even though I've fallen.
Yep.
But let's do it,
Yeah. Yeah. I had these shirts made up when Mandy and I were going back on the river, and I had these shirts made up that say do the thing even if your hands shake, and say the thing even if your voice breaks. Because a lot of times we kind of pull our punches, and we pull back and don't really embrace those things because we're a little scared. But
Yeah.
you gotta
You got to do it.
and again, and I've been the guy that's backed off of stuff before because I had worst case scenario images in my mind and didn't do that. And I have
Mm-hmm.
learned to push through those for sure, most of the time, because gosh, it's so rewarding when you do the thing, whatever that thing
Yeah.
is,
Yeah,
you know.
for sure. I feel that way a little bit with Iron Man. I'm like, I keep talking about it, but
Mm-hmm.
it terrifies me. But at the same
Yeah.
time, I'm like, I know it's going to be so worth it. Like,
What distance have
anyways,
you done?
I've
Because
done
you
an
are a
Olympic.
triathlete.
Yeah, I've
Okay.
done Olympic distance is the
Okay.
furthest. And I did it on a torn meniscus.
Ah,
So
no.
that wasn't fun in Knoxville.
Oh
Yeah,
man.
that was not enjoyable. But um, I don't know. I
I've
think it's,
got I was gonna
go
say
ahead.
I have done 2 half Ironman, and I've
Okay.
got in the future I'd like to do an Ironman. But talk about doing something when you're afraid. I did a half Ironman in New Orleans in Lake Pontchartrain. And I just remembered, I remember how scared I was. And to jump in that lake, I mean, I had a full-blown panic attack to the point where, because the wind was blowing like 25 miles an hour that day, the water was just, I mean, it was like a washing machine. It was real choppy. And we were close enough to the swim route was skirting the bulwark over there. So we were close enough to grab onto something. And I remember swimming over there and grabbing onto the wall and feeling like, and there were several people getting pulled out of the water there. I watched several people get pulled out of the water because they were just like, nope, I'm not swimming in this. And I came pretty close. Or I should say I sat there and considered it. It was, but I had to force myself to put my face back in the water and swim it. And I don't know how I would feel driving home from New Orleans with the DNR, you know?
Yeah, that's not.
Or DNF.
DNF. I was like,
yeah.
Yeah, that's what, in Knoxville, I had a point where my knee was killing me. I'm sitting on the side of the road, like halfway through the bike, and the medic team comes by and is like, hey, are you okay? And like in that moment I was like, if I get help from you, I DNF, and that's not an option. You know? And so I was like, all right, get up, athlete, let's go. And ended up having my fastest 10K ever, even with a meniscus tear. But
really, do you think you were running on fear a little bit, maybe running on shame? Because I feel like I had a pretty daggum good swim after I put my face in the water and went, because I think I was swimming tentatively at first. And then after I sort of had the panic attack and it passed and I put my face back in the water, there was a little more resolve to my swim after that. And I bet that's what that's what yours was like. You just, there was a little more dedication to what you were trying to do that day. I would be willing to bet.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like for that race, I was doing it with Team in Training. And so I had just raised like $3,500 or something for Leukemia Lymphoma Society. And I was like, I'm carrying the names of these people who have either won their battle with leukemia or lost their, and I'm like, who am I to have I'm like injured, not even injured, but they have to get up and they don't want to fight leukemia, but they have to, you know what I mean? So that was definitely that extra drive. And I was having surgery 2 days later. So I was like, if I do any more damage, whatever.
Yeah, they can just fix it. They can fix it when they go in there. I ran the Memphis Marathon, and one of the most powerful parts of that was when you actually run through the campus of St. Jude and the Children's Hospital. And so these children with cancer come down to the curb with they had masks on before masks were cool, before anybody knew what that was.
They still aren't cool.
Well, so they would come down to the curb and cheer us on. And man, one, it's hard to run when your eyes aren't dry.
Right.
And two, you just can't moan about your aching knee or you're out, you're out of breath or whatever. You just can't.
So true.
So it was, that's such a great, it's a great organization, but it's also a great race. That Memphis is one of my favorite, most impactful races I've done. It was just awesome.
That's awesome. So, I mean, since we're on the world of triathlon, and you don't have to go into big detail or anything, but you kind of had to overcome some health stuff. Like, how did you got into triathlon because of a diagnosis that you had received, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So so if you don't mind, like, talk about that a little bit, and then how has triathlon like transformed or changed your life or your outlook on it?
I was in my mid to late 30s. This would have been in 2013. I was not feeling good, and my wife had noticed a change. I was doing commercial carpentry, and I would come home from the job late afternoon, go to bed. She would wake me up and I would eat dinner, and then I would go back to bed. And I felt lethargic in a way that I just can't even explain. And I could not get enough water to drink. It didn't matter how much I drank. I had like cotton mouth. I just did not feel good. And then we were driving home one night and I couldn't read the road signs. They were blurry. And I kept checking my face. I was like, I got my glasses on. And so Mandy started Googling these symptoms like blurry vision, constantly thirsty. I had lost a little weight that I hadn't even noticed, and really, really, really lethargic. And she's like, boy, those are all symptoms of diabetes. And so the next day I went into the doctor and he took a blood test there and it was 3 times the normal limit. And then the next day it was 4 times the normal limit. And so they put me on insulin injections then. And so there's a history of diabetes in my family. My grandmother, my mother, I'm sorry, my dad, my grandmother and my dad, and they weren't triathletes, but they weren't big, unhealthy people. I mean, my dad was 160 pounds when he got diagnosed, and I was around 200, 205, something like that. And it really scared me. I remember the first time I put the insulin needle in my skin, it's kind of I got a little lightheaded, I got a little woozy sticking yourself with a needle.
Yeah.
And after a couple weeks, I was just like, I got to do something. And my cousin, he's an Ironman, and I called him up and I was like, hey man, like if I want to do a shorter one, or there's shorter triathlons than Ironman. And he said, oh yeah, there's all different lengths. And so he got me into the pool. I could barely make it 800. We went for an 800 meter swim and I about threw up. And I got a borrowed bike and some ratty running shoes. And I did a sprint triathlon, and I'd never run more than 3 miles in my life. And so it was exciting because this one had 4 miles on it. And so I felt like Superman having run 4 miles. And then, some weight came off, the blood sugar numbers went down. And I really just, the health benefits aside, I really learned to love that sort of pain cave. And it kind of reminded me in a way of being on the river when Mandy and I, the first time when we would just row for 8 hours and your shoulders would be sore, but you would just keep going because you get in that zone. And it reminded me a lot of how good that felt. And so I've been doing cycling events and marathons and triathlons for the last 7 years now. I mean, I haven't reversed the diabetes. I've definitely brought the numbers way down and within range, and I shoot less insulin now. And the doctor, the endocrinologist is pretty happy where things are at, and I'm pretty happy where things are at. But I wonder what would have happened if I just kind of acquiesced and said, okay, I'm just going to shoot the insulin, maybe eat a little better, maybe not, just take the insulin and depend on that to bring the numbers down. But I really did radically change my diet and hardcore get into exercise for a while, which is it's you got to keep the motivation, like month after month, year after year. You got to find something to kind of fight towards. And so my wife goes to these burn boot camps, like she does the CrossFit stuff, and I'm always asking her, like, how do you do that? Because for me, and I don't know how you are, I want a race on the calendar. I'm training for this thing, like that. That helps me sort of dial in and focus on that race or that event that I'm going for. Are you that way?
I am. Yeah. It helps with the dedication, where it's like, okay, I don't know if almost it's like I have an end and goal. Like I know I'm not going to stop doing triathlon like once that race hits, but in the mental game a little bit, it's like, I just have to get to that day and then I can
That's
be done.
what I mean. Yeah.
And then it's like
totally
race day. You're like, all right, when's my next one? Like I've already signed up for another one. And, but yeah, I'm the same way. And I think it's interesting to hear just even more about how you changed your diet and your exercise and your health got better. It didn't completely cure it per se, but I hate hearing when so many people rely on medicine and rely on, this not false, but artificial type of way, when our bodies like like the Lord made us to heal ourselves, and I'm very grateful for doctors and the knowledge that they have that I don't have. But at the same time, it's like we were made to heal ourselves. You know, we were made to
Right.
get sick. We were made to heal ourselves. Well, anyways, that's a whole other topic. But
It-
so I love hearing that, how you're like, this was the bad place that I was in, but
Yeah.
then because of dedication and just changing your lifestyle, you're in such a healthier, probably happier place than you were when you were like,
absolutely. Yeah. And I really looked at it like I kind of had to make I don't know what you call it, like maybe a holistic change. Like I said, you can't,
mm-hmm.
I don't want to rely on just the medicine, but like you said, I don't also just want to rely on getting up, early and going to the gym, because what good is it to go ride 50 miles and then stop at McDonald's on the way home? And so I started doing something I had never done before, because I'm a Memphis kid and I had a lot of barbecue and stuff growing up. But I started watching these health documentaries. I started watching like Cowspiracy and Forks Over Knives and a lot of these documentaries that sort of opened my eyes up to, the fact that food is medicine. And it really changed so diabetes sort of changed the way that I viewed exercise, but also the way that I viewed what I was putting on my plate. It just makes you hyper aware of the things that you're putting into your body, because you eat a meal and then an hour later you're testing your sugar. And I mean, you can see what it's doing. I mean, it's like putting something in an engine and driving the thing an hour later. Like you're getting feedback in those blood sugar numbers. And, it's going down a path that kind of scared me. So
yeah, for sure. That's amazing. So talking about all this triathlon stuff, and, before we started recording, we mentioned that not a huge fan of swimming, but you are a fan of the cycling portion, right? And so,
love it. Yeah.
So you just finished up a pretty cool thing that is mind blowing, and I don't know if I would love to do it or not.
You would.
But you kind of did a version of your row, but on the bike, right? So you took a trip down to Natchez Trace.
Yep.
So tell us about that a little bit, like the distance that you went, where you started. Just kind of start off with that. So how long is Natchez, right?
It's a 444 mile road parkway that runs from Nashville, Tennessee to Natchez, Mississippi. And it parallels a historic road. And so the Natchez Trace sort of figures into our river trip because I'm a history geek. I don't have a degree in it, but I'm an amateur historian, I guess. But back in the day, before steamboats, the rivermen would float their produce and stuff down the Mississippi to New Orleans, walk up to Natchez, Mississippi, and then they would walk the Natchez Trace, which was a Native American trail that followed deer and bison trail through the woods. So it was an established road that connected Nashville and Natchez before Nashville and Natchez even existed. But these flatboatmen would walk the road back with a year's worth of wages, right? So they've grown all this. They've got pigs, and they've turned the corn into whiskey. And so they've got all of this stuff on the flatboat, float it down to New Orleans. They sell everything on the boat, including the boat. And then they would, the people in New Orleans would tear the boat apart and just use the lumber. And these guys would walk home with a year's wages in their pockets. And so there were highwaymen, there were robbers and stuff along this road. And there's parts of the parkway that parallel the old road where you can actually go down and see it. And it's, there's a divot in the ground where the old road went.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had always wanted to do the Natchez Trace. Now, a lot of the footpath is gone. It's been, farmed over or paved over or whatever. So there are separate segments of the old road that exist, but there is this ribbon of asphalt that's 444 miles that parallels it. And I had wanted to do it. It was one of those things I just said, yeah, one day I'll do it. One day I'll do it, and didn't put it on the calendar.
What drew you to that? What drew you to like wanting to do Natchez Trace?
To cycle it?
Yeah.
One, the river connection.
Okay.
The river connection, because I feel like it's connected to the Mississippi.
Yeah.
But I didn't think about cycling it until I got into doing triathlons, and
Okay.
I would see these people like with panniers, I think they're called, the bags on the back,
Yeah.
and they'd go on these overnight trips. And I was like, wait a minute, like that's a thing. I want to do that. And the Natchez Trace seemed like an obvious place to do that. There's no commercial traffic on. There are cars on it, but there's not commercial traffic. There's just, there's a 50-mile speed limit. So it seemed like a conducive place to try and do an overnight trip.
Mm-hmm.
And it just happened to align with my sort of love of river history. And so for I would say the last 4 or 5 years, I've been telling myself I'm going to do because I'd never done an overnight bike trip. And I was like, I'm going to do this overnight bike trip. And I've been working on this book about our river journey. And I'd kind of gotten frustrated with the pace of it. And I'm working on the first draft. And I read something that an author said, you got to treat yourself like a little kid and give yourself prizes, right? You got to give yourself a reward.
Yeah.
And so I decided when I finished the first draft of the book, when I got through from beginning to end, the first draft, I was going to set the book aside for a week and go. That was going to be my reward. So not Reese's Pieces, but a bike ride, 444 miles. So, so last week, my wife dropped me off at the Loveless Cafe in Nashville, and I got a biscuit and got on the trace and spent 5 days riding down the Natchez Trace by myself, over the hills and through the woods. But the cool thing is on the Natchez Trace, there's a whole lot of places where you can stop, and they have signage at the places where the old trace intersects it, or where there used to be, actually where there is one of the old inns that was on the original Natchez Trace. There's Native American earthen mounds along the trace. It crosses the Tennessee River. It's just a beautiful road. And so it was nice for me to just be able to put aside the manuscript for a week and get on the bike and go and do something I hadn't done, really, to kind of see if I could do it. Because I had done centuries before, but to ride 90 miles, go to sleep, and then get back on the bike and tell yourself, okay, we're going another 90 to 100 miles today. I'd never done that before. So to do that back to back 5 days in a row was it was something. And then my wife drove down to Natchez. We got to stay in a bed and breakfast, and we drove home, been home about a week. So
that's awesome.
It's something that every, if you're a cyclist / history buff, I can't really think of a better place to do something like that.
Totally. And it's like you said, it's a great road because bikes have the right of way on that parkway. It's like normal roads, you have to share the road, and cars. But like, I remember when I first found that out, I was like, I'm going to go ride on Natchez all the time. Cause it's just, no stoplights and rolling hills.
That's right. Right.
It's so cool.
There's no stoplights. There's no stop signs. There's actually a race. So I met somebody on the Natchez Trace, a cyclist, who told me about this race that they do. And it's kind of a relay thing, but they go from Nashville to Natchez. They do the whole thing in one go in like 28 hours or something like that. Because you said there's no stop signs, there's no stoplights, and there are signs all down the trace that tell the motorist you must change lanes to pass. The cyclist can use the full lane. So I saw
awesome.
one other cyclist doing it, and I also passed a guy who was walking the Natchez Trace. He was walking all the way down the Natchez.
That's amazing. So what would you say was the most challenging part of that trip down Natchez?
One was the saddle sores. Like I said, I'd never ridden more than one day in a row. So to ride 5 days in a row sort of felt like I was getting, like I had bruises by the third or fourth day. That was kind of difficult. So I'd kind of coast down the hills. But the other thing that I really didn't count on, I brought some like podcasts and books on tape and stuff like that. And I would, I'd put one earbud in and leave the other one out so I could hear the traffic. But I just remember it's pretty lonely. It's pretty lonely because there's stretches on the trace where you're 15, 30, 40 miles and you might pass near another town, but you you can't see the other town. I mean, there's stretches where it just feels like 30, 40 miles. You're just going through the wilderness, and you might see a couple other cars. But it kind of gets in your head. So when we did the rowing trip, I was with Mandy, and I've done some, like I said, some marathons and centuries, but those are just like one day, couple of miles, lot of miles, but you're done by the end of the day. But to do a multi-day trip, I'd never done that, a multi-day trip by myself. And so the loneliness sort of creeping in, in some of those miles. So I would say that was actually the one of the difficult parts, maybe as difficult as the physical aspect of it was just, just pressing forward and kind of keep, because I'm a naturally extroverted, like Enneagram type 7 person. Like I want to hang out with people, so just out there by yourself the loneliness is just as grueling as the physical aspect. At least it was for me. I think there's other people that would be like, oh, it's total bliss just to be so far from other people. But there are those of us that's a difficult ask.
For sure. So what did you do? Like, how did you combat that?
Yeah, I would, I feel like those episodes came on when I didn't have anything in my ear. I didn't have any kind of distraction. And so if it was just me listening to the wind blow past and, some animals kind of skittering around on the leaves, I could hear, I saw some white-tailed deer and some squirrels and everything, but the leaves had just started to fall down. And so I could, I'd be riding past and I'd hear these little explosions of leaves where things were running away. But, miles and miles on end of listening to that. And they're not, nature sounds are great. It's beautiful. But I'm one of those guys that just has a tendency to sort of my thoughts start spiraling. They start obsessing on, on bigger things, on mortality and legacy and faith and all those sort of things. And it can, it can kind of spook you out. It can get too big for your head. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I have to confess, I would just pull the earbuds out and I would listen to a podcast or a book on tape and let somebody else sort of take the conversational wheel. Rather than me having a conversation in my head, I would listen to somebody else's conversations.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was cheating, but that was my method.
No, I don't think it's cheating. I think it's helpful. I think as long as we have those moments of quiet, where we can, hear from the Lord or just process our thoughts. But no, I mean, we have podcasts for a reason.
Right.
So, and you definitely don't have to go into your personal life or anything, but what would be one thing looking back, that you maybe learned about yourself, about life, about God, whatever, any of those things?
That I learned about myself that, I think one thing is that part of me is still there that was there before, which is, when we were on the river, you just got to get up and go do it. And I haven't done a half Ironman in a couple of years, but those long grueling races, like, it's an empowering thing. You know what I mean? There's times in our lives where we all sort of get made to feel small, whether that's an external thing making us feel small or our internal thoughts or the dialogue we have, the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves can make us feel small. But to do something like that, it's an empowering thing. You get to the finish line, and I definitely had this overwhelming feeling of like, I can still do this when it, and so I guess I learned that I had, that well of resolve is still there for physical things.
Awesome.
And yeah, that I can cope sometimes, even when I think I can't. And the other challenge of this whole thing was I really didn't know how my blood sugar would react to hours and hours and hours on end. And day 2, I had shot a little too much insulin. And so I kept pulling over again and again to the side of the road, checking my blood sugar. And it would be like 70, which is for me really low. A normal range would be like around 100. Mine's usually around 120, 130, but so I had some Skittles in my bag. And so I
Wow.
kept having to eat the Skittles to kind of bump the blood sugar up a little way. But it was, yeah, I guess, you know, you spend that much time with yourself, you're gonna question and doubt some things, and
Yeah.
and you kind of learn that it just doesn't. A lot of times, what's in front of you seems really daunting, and whether it's the river or the road or the book that I'm writing, like any of these things I've sort of engaged in, at some point it feels overwhelming. At some point you look out at the horizon, it just seems too far away. And I've just learned that you have to kind of just look at your feet and take one more step forward, or just one more, you know, turn of the pedals, or one more row, or I'm just going to write one more sentence. And, you know, given enough time, you can go a long, long, long way, you know.
That's good.
I had counted my pedal strokes, a couple of miles. I counted my pedal strokes, and it was like about 330 to 350 per mile. And I can't remember what the math was, but it was hundreds of thousands of times. It was 500,000 or 600,000 times that the pedals turned over. And so I say that to kind of illustrate that, you know, if you think 444 miles, if you think like 29 hours on the bicycle or whatever, it just seems, it feels too great a thing sometimes. And, you know, 500,000 pedal strokes seems like a lot, but it's one after another, after another. And again, it doesn't matter whether you're rowing or writing or running or any of those things that we do. You know,
Yeah.
it's a journey.
Or going down the street, playing with your kids, doing school, doing all those things. Like,
oh yeah,
I love the parallels between cycling and athletics. I mean, specifically cycling and swimming and running, that we can pull from to life, you know, where it's like you just said, just, you got to keep on going, keep on doing it. That's amazing. So you may not know the answer to this yet, but what's next? Like, what's the next big thing you want to do?
So first and foremost, the book that I'm working on, I want to get it finished and I want to get it published. So that's the big thing I'm working on right now. I put out a new record in April of this year. Strange time to do a record launch, but I put out a record called Blood and the Honey earlier this year. I'd like to get that thing out there a little more, but I've got a bunch of new material. I'd like to record the stuff that I've written lately. I'd like to get something out next year. And then I would say, because ever since I thought to do the Natchez Trace thing as my sort of gift to myself for finishing the draft, now I keep thinking, well, what happens when you finish the whole thing? Like, what do you do then? And so I don't know. I have these, like, I kind of seesaw between some different things. I would love to do an ocean row. I don't know if you've ever seen these guys that row these boats on the ocean. And I'm not saying across the Atlantic, but I think it'd be cool to row offshore somewhere. Or I would really like to do at some point after doing this Natchez trip. I really loved it, and I'd love to do a continental bike trip at some point. And whether that's north to south, east to west, whatever. I mean, I would love to do a longer distance bike ride. So those are my you know, in my you know, and they're not on the calendar, but those are my sort of three things I'm working on. I'd love to finish this book. I'd love to record another album, and I'd like to do another big, hairy, scary endurance event.
Go do the Tour de France. Who knows?
Not those hills. That's too much.
Too
much hills.
Insane. I'd be like, nope, I'm done. I'm not climbing that.
Yeah, I'll walk this thing.
Yeah, for sure. So you have a website, right? TrapperHaskins.com, right?
TrapperHaskins.com.
I'll put that down there. Those shirts that you were talking about, do you have those for sale? And
They are, yep.
still
They're
cool.
yeah, those shirts, they say, do the thing even if your hands shake,
Yep.
and say the thing even if your voice breaks. I've got those shirts
I
on the
love that.
website. And
I'm gonna have
if
to get one
anybody's
of those.
watching, I've got these, I don't know if you can see that. These are my
Yep.
mutton chop stickers that my daughter drew. So
Nice.
anybody that goes to the website can get one of those.
Nice. Awesome.
So
Well, I'll put all
yeah,
that down below in the description and all that stuff. You know, keep up with Trapper on Facebook, and are you on Instagram?
I am. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm on all social media. It's just at Trapper Haskins.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, hope people
Pretty easy to
can
find.
keep up with you on that. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for taking time out of your night. I only have 2 more questions that I
Sure.
ask all of my people. First one, what are 3 simple joys in your life?
Three simple joys. I've
3
got a lot
simple
of, I
joys.
have, yeah, I've got a lot of joys in my life. I feel very blessed, but 3 things that, and they're simple, is, I love baseball. Seeing my son play baseball. He's 11 years old playing little league baseball. And my parents live near enough that they can come to the games too. And there's literally times that I've been choked up at the game because my son, I love seeing him excel at baseball, at a sport that I love. But to see my dad, like, with his hands up on the fence watching his grandson play, that's special in a way I cannot put in words. The other thing is early morning coffee and books. There's nothing better than starting the day off with a book and a cup of coffee, and it's pitch black outside. I love that. And the other thing, I would not have said this until COVID happened, but sitting in a restaurant with friends, I just, like, it seems like such a simple thing that we took for granted for so long. And now with all this, the stipulations and stuff, and wearing the mask, and so you get to the table, just all of those things, it seems like such a simple thing just to be at a restaurant or a bar or something with your friends, and we're limited in doing that now. So that would be, I miss that. Just the normalcy of doing that.
Right. For sure. That's awesome. I love it. Yeah. I try to ask that because, it's important to be able to identify joys in our life. And I feel like joy is a completely different thing than happiness, right? Like, you can be,
yes.
You could maybe not have a great situation going on, but still find joy, So it's an exercise I like to do with myself, my students. So it's just fun to hear what people's joys are.
And it keeps you focused on it's a healthier place to be, to focus on those things, rather than things that are going wrong, whether those are things you can control or can't control. It's just not a way to live.
So good. So my last question, and it goes along with your second simple joy. What are 3 books that you're reading now, or that you would recommend people to read, whether it has to do with woodworking or triathlon or none of it? Just what are 3 like your favorite books?
So right now, and if I can say this real quick, I started doing this year. I had a habit of drinking my morning coffee and just scrolling on the phone. And about 8 months ago, and I love reading, and I would find other times to read, but about 8 months ago, I started this habit of, bless you, this habit of, like, I would drink my morning coffee, and instead of scrolling on the phone, I would read at least 10 pages. So in a month, that's a 300-page book. And so you could read 12 extra books a year if you're just not scrolling Snapchat or whatever. The first thing you get, I use social media, but the first thing I do in the morning, cup of coffee, and I read. So the book I'm reading right now is called Disappointment River, by Brant Castner. It's a guy who, he paddled the Mackenzie River up in the Northwest Territories, which was which is what they thought might be the Northwest Passage back in the day. So this one fits into my like adventure travel and history in the same book. So this guy's like tracing Mackenzie's trip. And so the book sort of goes back and forth between Mackenzie's journals and sort of their search for the Northwest Passage, and then back to 2016 when Brian Castner was doing the river. So that's what I'm currently reading. But books I've read recently that I really like, either what they say or sort of what they stand for. Mark Manson, his book is the Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. Have you read this one?
I have not read it. I have heard a lot about it, though. I probably should add it to my list.
It's fantastic. The reason that I love it, because you look at the title and it kind of, like, at first blush, you might think it's about just not giving a damn about anything. You just, whatever. You might have different ideas of what it's about, but it's really about editing your life down to what's essential. So the book is really not about not giving an F about anything. It's about learning to identify the things that you should give, the few things that you should, give a care about. And so that book kind of goes along with one of my favorite quotes is Jim Collins. I can't remember the name of his book, but he wrote in his book, if you have more than 3 priorities, you don't have any.
Wow.
And I have too many times in my life, I feel like taking on this project and that project, and this sounds cool. And, oh, wouldn't that be neat to do that? And then you end up with this basket that's so full, you can't do any of it. And it all sounds exciting and you want to do it all, but you have to edit things down. And so Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck is, giving an F it's a great read about kind of editing your life down to what matters. And then another book, I really loved this one, and I read it before I did the cycling trip, is Cycling Home from Siberia. And his name's Rob Lilwall, Lilwall. Cycling Home from Siberia is the name of it. But he's an English guy who rides his bicycle from Siberia. It's covered in ice. And I don't remember how many thousands of miles or how many months. It took him a few years, I think, to get home. But that is a huge, scary trip. And he's a guy of faith. And so he kind of gets into wrestling with some of that stuff during his journey. And it's just inspiring because he's not an elite cyclist or anything like that. He's just a dude with a dream who got on a bike on a frozen road in Siberia and cycled his bicycle all the way back to England. And so I love those 3 books. I love this one I'm reading right now, this Disappointment River. But yeah, I'm probably like you. I have a stack of books on my nightstand and on my coffee table and stuff that I try and focus on just one book at a time, though, because I find that if I have too many of them going at once, just like that Jim Collins quote, like if you got more than 3 books open, you don't have any because you're not making any headway on any of them.
Right.
But,
yeah. I have not read as much as I should have this year, which is surprising because having hip surgery, I couldn't do anything, but I still didn't read much. Anyways.
Do you listen to books?
No,
like audio?
No, not really. I need to. I mean, I do. I love reading, and I think I have found that I need to, like, I love biographies, autobiographies, like stories of adventure and inspiration more than the novel,
Yeah.
So
I'm the same.
Like I read my Bible every day, but like novels and those types of biographies, I just need to read more of them because I love them and they're so inspiring. And then I'm like, I can conquer the world.
Right. I'd probably
put a date on it. Let's go.
I'd probably read 9 nonfiction books for every fiction book. I don't read a whole lot of fiction. Let me throw one more book in there. When I was on the Natchez Trace, one of the ones that I listened to, it's called The Case for Jesus by Brant Brant Pitre, Pitre.
Okay.
And it's a really great book that kind of digs into the historical record. So it looks at it looks at both early Christians and Jewish and Gentiles or whatever. It looks at all different writings from that era to sort of piece together a case for Christ. Basically, it's called The Case for Jesus. But it's pretty mind blowing, and it was a great thing to kind of take my head away while I was on my way to Natchez. So
that's awesome. Well, man, thank you so much for taking time out of your night to hang out and have a conversation with us and with me. I don't have a mouse in my pocket, but
absolutely, I enjoyed it so much.
I know people are gonna be inspired, and I love following what you're doing and all that jazz. So hopefully I can make it out to the baseball field this next summer.
Yeah, hopefully things open up to the point where we can have people out there, or we can get you on a team this year.
Yeah,
out there playing.
That would be great.
I told you that you'd enjoy him. It was such a fun conversation with Trapper tonight, and I hope that you were inspired by his stories as much as I was. And be sure to go follow him on social media. All of his handles are going to be in the description, and he's going to be doing some really cool things here in the future. So go follow him, buy his stuff, do all of the things. And like I always say, each of us has a unique story that only we get to live. So get out there and live your great story. See you next time.